My guest at this time is Carrie Severino. She is chief counsel at the Judicial Crisis Network. She joined us back in July as the president was about to make his nomination known for Supreme Court Justice to replace Anthony Kennedy. Ultimately, of course, it was federal Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who is now in day 2 of his 3 days of confirmation hearings. Carrie's with us now to discuss how she thinks Kavanaugh is doing, as well as some of the Democratic tactics to delay and challenge Kavanaugh. So, Carrie, thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Well, let's start with the very beginning. Here's how the confirmation hearing started on Tuesday in the very first sentence of Chairman Chuck Grassley trying to call the committee hearing to order.
I welcome everyone to this confirmation hearing on the nomination of
Mr. Chairman.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Mr. Chairman.
To serve as Associate Justice.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized for a question
States.
before we proceed.
Regular order.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized to ask a question before we proceed. The committee received just last night, less than 15 hours ago, 42,000 pages of documents that we have not had an opportunity to review or read or...
That's California Democrat Kamala Harris. She was followed by Senator Klobuchar and Senator Blumenthal and others interrupting Grassley repeatedly. There's also been countless outbursts from demonstrators in the audience. Ultimately, Carrie, what do you make of the Democrats' efforts to postpone things because they got some of the documents they requested fairly close to the time of the hearings?
Well, they did get those documents close to the time of the hearings, but don't be confused. This is not the reason they're postponing it. They had a conference call earlier in the day, in fact, that Senator Durbin admitted to, that already they were talking about what are we going to do? Are we going to walk out of the hearings? Ultimately, they decided, let's just disrupt the hearings. It's actually been really shameful. There were 70 people arrested yesterday because of disrupting the hearings. Not just the senators interrupting 44 times. These are people standing up, shouting, being dragged out of the room. And you had even some of the senators actually encouraging them and rooting them on. It's been so disrespectful to the process. And it just, to me, Senator Cruz reminded us of the old lawyer's adage. If you have the facts on your side, pound the facts. If you've got the law on your side, pound the law. And if you don't have the facts or the law, pound the table. And that is effectively what they're doing. They're just pounding the table, kind of a tantrum, because they don't want people to actually get a chance to hear from Judge Kavanaugh himself, who, in fact, is a very calm, articulate, thoughtful, even-handed judge, and that kind of goes contrary to their narrative they've been trying to spin. So instead, they're just having a tantrum and kind of a political performance art, I guess, going on in the room.
Carrie, when it comes to the magnitude of this event, I go back to Senator Sass's comments from yesterday saying that there shouldn't be Republican or Democratic judges. There's a reason that judges have lifetime appointments. It's because they're not supposed to be political. If they were, they'd have to stand before the voters every 2 or 4 or 6 years, however the framers would have put it. But that's not what the framers intended. And so ultimately it comes down to character and temperament. If you don't think he has those things, vote no. Otherwise, stop the charades. What does that say about where we are, I guess, really over the past 30 years now that each one of these nominations turns into quite a spectacle?
It's very disappointing, and this is something, and I think it was Senator Graham who said later in the day, if this were 20 years earlier, he would have gotten 90-plus votes. Judge Kavanaugh is someone who has a dozen years on the bench, 300-plus opinions to his name. He's so smart. He's recognized as being one of the leading federal judges by litigators across the spectrum, from Obama's Attorney General or Solicitor General, rather, to Akil Reed Amar, famous, very liberal Yale Law School professor. The people who actually know his reputation realize how silly this sounds to someone who actually knows Judge Kavanaugh. But that doesn't really matter to the left. They're going for ratings. They're going for get out the vote efforts. 3 of the people on the committee are running for president in 2020. So, they're looking to cut campaign video. They're not actually interested in finding out about the nominee. That's unfortunately where we are. I think, again, this is in any other more rational environment, he'd be someone who would get near unanimous votes. But unfortunately, we are just in a ultra politicized state at this moment. So it's not about the nominee at all.
What's your impression of how he's done so far with respect to explaining his judicial philosophy and handling some of the more challenging questions from the left, who, of course, want to pin him down on issues from abortion to executive power and more?
Yeah, I think he's done a great job. Doesn't surprise me because he's really smart. He understands this process. He has worked in the White House counsel's office helping with the judicial selection process. So he knows this from inside and out. And they're, of course, trying to get him to say how he would rule on a whole host of issues, which, no surprise, he is not actually saying what he's going to do, because no member of the current Supreme Court, and including many justices before them, has stated how they're going to rule in a future case. They can't do that under judicial ethics. He's, citing the same rules that everyone from Justice Ginsburg all the way on down has done, and that's not going to stop them from asking over and over. They would rather have him have to make them promises about how he's going to rule in a certain case than talk about these important principles of how to apply the law in a neutral and way that puts your politics aside. So I think he's done a great job, though, of trying to explain that and trying to have it be an educational moment to the extent that you can. You can't really educate the senators. They don't want to hear. But at least some of the American people can listen and get a chance to understand his perspective. Speaking of, for example, all the times he ruled against President Bush, who nominated him and who he worked for many years, because your job as a president isn't to rule for the policy you might like. It's to analyze the law faithfully and neutrally, and Judge Kavanaugh has that in spades.
Let's do a little bit of head counting here, Carrie, from what we already know. Susan Collins has said pretty nice things about Judge Kavanaugh. We now have 51 Republicans in tow, at least the full roster now that John Kyle is in there to replace the late Senator McCain. You have to assume that he would probably be a vote for Judge Kavanaugh. So is there any concern on your part at this point that he's not going to get to 50 or even 51?
I really think he's got the votes, not just of the Republicans, but I think there will be quite a few Democrats who are going to ultimately vote for him. When you consider that 3 Democrats voted for Justice Gorsuch, Senators Heitkamp, Donnelly, and Manchin, all the 3 of them this year are actually up for re-election in red states that went significantly for Trump. And if you look at the polling we've done, it shows that in all of those states, a majority of their citizens want them to confirm Kavanaugh, and even a majority of the independents, which, of course, are the real people they're targeting, also think Kavanaugh should be confirmed. So I say right now they're kind of keeping their powder dry and holding back, and that's what Senator Schumer has asked them to do. So it makes his path a little easier in terms of trying to rile up his base. But I think ultimately it's going to be very hard with someone as reasonable, as talented, and as just blatantly, obviously qualified as Judge Kavanaugh for many of those senators to oppose him. So he'll be confirmed, and it will be in a bipartisan fashion, too.
I don't want to necessarily tread over ground we've already gone over here, Carrie, but I got your reaction specifically to how he handled the Democratic questions. You mentioned how he looked to demonstrate his intelligence and his ability to handle this process. Anything in particular, a specific question, a specific response that really stood out to you in day one of the actual questioning?
Gosh, there have been so many. I think one of the things that I've liked hearing is that when he is asked, questions about big cases, he really takes the time to walk them through what he was thinking. So there have been discussions of several different cases. One of them had to do with whether illegal immigrants had a federal right to labor arbitration, or different things where he took the time to sit down and walk the senator through, here's what the logic of, here's the law I was looking at, here are the actual facts. Sometimes the senator didn't even want to hear the actual, they asked the question, but especially the Democrat senators, they want to ask the question and just go, mic drop, and walk away. But you can't just do that. He's like, no, there's an answer to that question. You think that was quite witty, but no, there really is an answer. So I think he really shines when he's explaining his logic. And he doesn't hide and try to tell them what he thinks they want to hear. He's happy to explain carefully. And he's a teacher, remember, as well. He's taught at Harvard, at Yale, and at Georgetown law schools. And it's now you can see why he's got such great ratings from his students, because he is very good at carefully explaining and breaking down these complicated cases and making them clear.
Well, Carrie, we'll let you get back to following the hearings. Thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Carrie Severino is Chief Counsel at the Judicial Crisis Network. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.